evening. My name is Fluffy Temper. Welcome to Like Fluffy TV. Today we're going to continue on the Gluten Free Bread Machine Cookbook, 175 recipes for splendid breads. Today I'm going to put together the classic pizza crust. I'm trying to get through as many of these as possible before Mother's Day. I'm getting all my ingredients ready here. If I put everything on the counter, there's a good chance I won't forget anything. I feel like this might be the most important part of the video where you collect all your ingredients. I'm warming up some water. You can see it dripping in the sink there. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast to my bowl. Promptly realized that I put it in the wrong bowl, so I'm going to switch bowls. I'll test the water here to make sure the temperature is very warm, but not scalding. It should be about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And we'll add 1 cup of water to our yeast. And then we'll set it aside and let the little yeasties wake up. They've got a lot of work to do today. To my larger bowl, I'm going to add 2.5 cups of the light flour blend, which I will make in another video, I promise. Now again, in this recipe book, there are measurements in ounces, and all the previous reviews highly recommend that you use the ounces. And for this particular recipe, I would also agree. My dough came out a little runnier than I think it should have, according to what the other directions told me to do later on. So here I'm going to add 1/2 cup of corn starch or potato starch. This is potato starch. I also love this cookbook because it specifically says not to use potato flour, so when things are pretty close in name, it will explain to you what you're not supposed to be using. I'm going to follow this up with a tablespoon of dried oregano, which I think is a wonderful addition to this pizza crust. Once we get that oregano put away, we're going to put in 2.5 teaspoons of psyllium husk flakes or powder. I have the flakes here. A quick Google search for this ingredient I didn't know about tells me that it's used as a food thickener. And Google claims that it has lots of health benefits and increases dietary fiber. But do your own research. Here, I'm pretty sure it's just making sure that we're not soggy. Now I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of kosher or fine sea salt. Followed by 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. And then I'm going to toss in the 1/8 teaspoon of ascorbic acid, which again in this recipe is optional. I'm guessing if you left it out, you'd end up with fewer air holes in your bread. Now we're going to start adding our wet ingredients, which are going to be 3 egg whites, which apparently I never read this recipe, so I put in 3 eggs. Don't bake early in the morning. That might be why my dough came out a little on the runny side. I had some extra liquid in there. All right, so if you follow the recipe, do it the right way. Use 3 large egg whites at room temperature. Saving those shells for my ladies. Bin's getting a little full, time to put it out. And then I'm going to do the 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar here. That'll get all our bubbly reactions started. Give us a pretty decent crumb on something that doesn't actually have flour in it. Finish it off by adding up our yeast and water now that our yeasties are nice and awake. And then I'll mix this up here. I was bound and determined to do my best to make this recipe fail. I did not mix this well enough. You'll see when I'm pouring it out that I use my fingers to break up some chunks. If you're using this in the bread machine, the way the recipe is built, that's not going to be an issue. If you're doing it by hand, which is obviously an option, mix it better. Don't leave your clumps of flour substitute in there like I tried to do. In my defense, I have a lot going on today. I'm DMing a Dungeons & Dragons game later this afternoon. This is going to be part of the spread. I'll toss in the rest of the spread at the end of this video so you can see all the goodies that I made for everybody. We have anywhere from 10 to 8 people who show up on a weekly basis for Dungeons & Dragons. Or game night, we alternate. And I'll do other videos for those other foods later in the week. So I'm going to get my cookie sheet pan. I decided to put this as a rectangular pizza. Didn't feel like trying to make circular ones. This dough ended up more like a batter. Probably because I added too much liquid in those egg yolks. Also possibly because I didn't weigh everything out like I was supposed to. But in the end, this recipe still came out really good. Even though, like I said, I tried my hardest to make this fail. I'm going to put down a parchment sheet. That way it doesn't stick to my pan. And pour out my sticky batter. Again, this recipe doesn't spread and fill up corners of things, so wherever you put this, if you wanted to do circular pizzas, you could grab 2 pans and do 2 circular pizzas. Because wherever you put this dough, it rises a little, but it's not going to spread and fall off your pan, which is really nice. But make sure that the way it looks when you're done spreading it is how it's going to look at the end. I'm going to spread this out. As you can tell, it is a super sticky batter. So I'm holding onto the parchment paper with one hand so it doesn't go sliding across the tray. This came out as a pan crust thickness. So if you were looking for a thinner crust pizza, I would make this fairly thin. The recipes do say that if you make it too thin, you end up with a cracker. So there's a fine medium there somewhere. Play around with it, make it a couple times. We are very, very rarely perfect the first time we make anything. But you'll get there. I have faith. So you'll see me in a minute stop and read the directions and realize that I did some weird things for this poor recipe. It does say to sprinkle the bottom. Sprinkle the top with the cornstarch. I'm sorry, with the cornmeal, which you see sitting in that corner that I haven't touched yet. And then it wants you to take another piece of parchment paper and put it on top and flip the whole thing over and then let it rise so that the cornmeal is on the bottom, like it would be in a traditional pizza dough. I had a lot of fun not reading the recipes on this recipe clearly. So I'm going to put the cornmeal on top, stick it in the oven, and then flip it over. You do you. It's not going to hurt anything in this particular instance. So here I'm going to let it rise for about an hour while I putz around and get some other things ready. I had to come up with some last minute adventure making stuff. I don't know why I ever let these people convince me to do a home brew. It's a lot more work. And I much prefer one-shots. That's why I make adventure guilds. But here we are. This beauty rose very nicely. Another thing I didn't do that the recipe encouraged you to do is to poke the center once this rises before you put it in the oven with a fork. That would prevent any large bubbles from happening. I didn't have any large bubbles happening, so I didn't worry about it, but you'll see me set the fork down while I contemplate my life. And even for all the mistakes, this dough rose very nicely. Didn't do anything special. It's on my counter. Didn't cover it. Didn't give it steam. Nowhere near as temperamental as regular bread in my kitchen. Here's what I was warning you about. I am looking at the recipe and going, oh look, I messed up in 12 different places. Said a quick prayer to my ancestors and said the hell with it. I'm gonna put the corn meal on top here, and then we'll get this sucker in the oven. We're at 350 degrees. I'm going to cook it for about 10 minutes. I don't want it golden brown yet. I want it solid but pale. There goes the fork. Chose not to poke holes. And editing magic. Boom! Pizza crust is cooked, out of the oven, looking sad and pale, which is what I want because we're going to put it back in the oven once we get the toppings on. Flip it over so the bottom is where it's supposed to be, which again, according to the directions, should have happened before this phase. But you'll see it still comes out nicely. In case you're curious, that little black and white corgi looking thing in the back there is Void. And then the lab mix thing that is right in front of me, that's Jackie. They are most definitely my cooking buddies. I love having a dog somewhere near the kitchen. If I drop something on the floor, they're there to clean it up. You just have to be careful not to trip. So I'm going to put on some pizza sauce. I'm going to make this really thin, mostly because I need the pizza sauce for another recipe that I'm going to be making later this day. I also don't want a soggy pizza. I prefer mine to be a little crispier. So I'm going to go light on all the toppings. I'm also trying to make the pizza crust the star of this show. So adding fewer toppings really helped with that. I only did cheese here. Feel free to add any other toppings you feel like putting on. I had made some pizza bagels later that have a bunch of stuff on them, so we're keeping this plain and simple. Like I said, the crust is the star of the show. Pulling that out of the oven in about 10 minutes, and we're looking pretty good. This crust came out really nice. It was like a focaccia. It was wonderful. Show you the rest of the spread. I will have videos on the rest of these foods coming up as soon as I edit them. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me.